Welcome to the Nectar TV podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purcell, and today we're talking Microsoft Teams and Nectar. We recently had a webinar about advanced troubleshooting and analytics for Microsoft Teams. Our guests today are our very own Ken Lasko and Tim Armstrong. Guys, welcome to the call.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So why don't we start off with you guys telling us a little bit about yourself? I know, Tim, you were on the last one, but you can give kind of a quick recap, and then we'll move to Ken and have him give a little background.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, Stephen. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tim Armstrong. I'm the Vice President of Product here at Nectar, which means that I run our small product management team. And so we are the folks who set the strategy and kind of define the requirements for the development and engineering team that goes and builds our products. My background has always been in the UC telecom space for the most part. I spent about 10 years at Microsoft. The last several years I was in at the time, it was the Link BG. So the Link Business Group at Microsoft. And then, of course, I was there during the time that it became Skype, when Microsoft bought Skype, the consumer product. So I've lived around this Link, well, even before that, OCS, LCS, to Link, to Skype, to Teams world has been a big chunk of my career.
Yeah, for a long time. Ken?
Yeah, I'm Ken Lasko. I am a product manager for Teams on Nectar Tin. Prior to working at Nectar, I was working at another analytics company doing analytics for Skype for Business and Link before that. And before that, I was a consultant for, 15 years, I think. Mostly Microsoft products, but then ever since OCS came out, I was the OCS guy, then the Link guy, and then the Skype guy. And as a result of all that, I am a Teams MVP, Microsoft MVP. And you may know me by my alternate personality, which is David Hasselhoff, otherwise known as the Hoff. And I'm the creator of the UC dial plan generator. That's known worldwide. Infamous. Probably more than famous, more infamous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right on.
And what's your blog, Ken?
It's UC Ken for UC UCKen at blogspot.com where I blog very infrequently. Unfortunately, I really should do that more. But
that's where you have all your dial plan stuff, right? Yeah.
No, you have to go to ucdialplans.com for that. That's where all the blog is separate. It's on Blogspot. But then ucdialplans.com, that's where you can go for my wonderful dial plan tool.
Got it.
And we'll post links to all of these in the bottom of the YouTube video below so that you can simply just click those links and find them.
Down below. Gotcha.
Well, Ken, since you're kind of the person of the hour today, and with your background and being the product lead for our Microsoft integrations, we kind of we can kind of jump right into this. How are things in your part of the world for COVID and working from home and trying to avoid?
We're slowly. Well, the thing is, I always work from home. I've been working from home for probably 10 years now, so that's nothing new for me. But what was new is the fact that my wife and son are home all the time as well, which also isn't terribly new because my wife's a teacher, so I'm used to them being around all day during the summertime. It was a fair bit different during COVID times because my wife was trying to work from home, which left our little guy, who's 8 years old, leaving him to his own devices, which never works out well, really. But things are slowly opening up. Canada's taking a really gradual approach here, opening things up slowly. Like in the past few weeks, we're starting to be able to go to patios and things like that, although restaurants by themselves aren't really open too much, but patios are. So it's pretty cool to see. Like, you realize, you go for a drive downtown and it's barren and awful. Then suddenly you start seeing patios open again, and it just makes you feel so happy because you get kind of going a little stir crazy, just being working from home all the time or being at home all the time.
Yeah, it looks like in Texas we're about to back up a little bit.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, you guys are going, everything's fine.
Yeah,
everything's fine.
We're closing down a few more things, I think, here pretty soon.
Well, that's probably wise, considering where things are going. Yep.
Yeah. Tim, how about you? How are things?
Yeah, we've got, these different phases in Washington, and it's a county by county thing. So the only kind of real major thing that's happened this week is that the governor issued a order or a law, I don't know what it is, something that you now have to wear face masks. Everyone has to wear face masks every time you're in public. So that is the thing. Of course, there are a lot of people who choose not to wear face masks for a variety of reasons, and so we'll see how that goes. Not all the sheriffs are going to enforce this new order, so we'll see what that means. But yeah, I mean, certainly we're seeing cases pick up again, unfortunately.
Yeah, we've had that where I live. Yeah, ours was the first municipality to say, nope, you got to wear face. If you're out in public and inside a store, you have to wear a face mask. So it's not yet. I don't know. I think it's spreading, and we haven't had like a provincial or national order yet, but I imagine that's going to come soon.
Yeah. Well, I know that with this pandemic and everything going on, you hear a lot of people, working from home and having to, run everything from their at-home cloud collaboration platforms, which kind of brings us to the topic for today, which is Microsoft Teams. Now, I know a lot of people previously used Skype for Business, and Microsoft Teams seems to be the path forward for Microsoft. Is that what they're transitioning everybody to? Kind of what's that path look like? Are they pulling everybody off Skype for Business? Is this the new thing?
Well, it's very interesting. Like you see a lot of companies, they're obviously aware of Teams, and that's the direction that Microsoft wants customers to go. And so a lot of customers have already been looking at it, little bits here and there and in various stages of deploying Teams. Larger ones obviously would move slower than smaller ones, but what we've seen with this whole COVID thing is a massive acceleration of customers' plans to move to Teams. They've taken the opportunity, realizing everybody's working from home, and they decided, okay, you know what? We're not sure if our infrastructure can handle this sort of load because they never planned for it before. So they decided, okay, well, you know what? Let's accelerate our moves. Like we've seen some very large customers, very surprisingly how quickly they've been moving to Teams. Like one customer with like 60 or 70,000, it just decided, and in the matter of a week or so, their call volume on Skype dropped off to 0, and their Teams call volume jumped up to their usual level. So it's been impressive how quickly customers have been moving to Teams.
Yeah, what do you think some of those top things are on the benefits of Teams over Skype that they're latching onto?
Well, the number one thing I think is the fact that you don't have very little infrastructure you need to worry about. There could be none, right? Like Skype has always been, its Achilles heel has been that it's rather complex to deploy properly, right? Like this, Microsoft made lots of inroads to make it as seamless as possible, but you still needed to be a pretty well-rounded expert on a lot of things, from certificates to firewall rules to DNS, everything in between, to be able to effectively deploy Skype for Business. And how many times would you join a meeting, either your own internally or another customer's, where it's like, oh, I can't seem to join, my desktop sharing's not working, this, that, or the other thing. So it's there, and so that gave a lot of people the impression that Skype for Business just wasn't very good, when really, in actual fact, Skype for Business itself is fine, but maybe the people who deployed it weren't really, maybe didn't do it best. Whereas Teams,
they didn't have voice background.
They didn't have a voice background.
I think that's Microsoft Teams or Skype for Business was complicated to deploy in the context of a Microsoft product. In the context to Avaya or CCM, it was like a walk in the park to deploy. I mean, it was a completely different paradigm. It's just that I think that Skype for Business was kind of trying to come at it the same way that Microsoft always approached their server products, which was wizard driven, as simple as possible. Kind of you could deploy it without necessarily a ton of expertise. And a lot of the Microsoft folks deploying those had expertise on Microsoft and SharePoint and Exchange, but not so much voice. And so I think a lot of the issues that Skype suffered, to your point, weren't really the technology as much as it was that the people who were deploying it just didn't have a lot of voice background.
Tim, with your
Yeah,
background coming from Microsoft in the Skype environment, a little on the business side, you see something attractive from a Teams perspective over Skype, just from a business case?
Well, I think, as a user, going from Skype to Teams was a tough transition for me, and there are definitely still times that I miss some of the capabilities around Skype. It's funny how quickly, as a user, you get used to using something new, and then you don't miss the old as much. But for the first, couple of weeks that I was using Microsoft Teams, I definitely felt some pain and some ways that I liked better about how Skype for Business worked. There's also a bit of irony in the way the Teams is organized around this idea of persistent chat. And the real irony here is that Skype for Business used to have pchat, or persistent chat. And pchat was like a really commonly asked for feature that always had a hard time getting prioritized in the product. And I just think it's ironic that now that, Teams is now really based on the idea of persistent chat, that it's kind of a 180 from how Microsoft originally did it. But I mean, from a business perspective, if I were to look at it from an enterprise perspective, there's no doubt about it. Getting out of the business of having to manage infrastructure certainly does seem attractive to a lot of customers, and not having to have the onus of making sure that your mediation servers or your edge servers or whatever are performing as expected, and all those configurations being correct. It's probably, it's a pretty strong value proposition to just have to get rid of that overhead.
Unless you're using direct routing, because then you still have to worry about those things.
Yeah, that's right. You still, of course, the on-prem infrastructure doesn't totally go away. Yeah, no doubt.
So, Ken, from a technical back-end point of view, the differences kind of between Skype and Microsoft Teams, because obviously Nectar is a monitoring and management collaboration platform. Just from that back-end perspective, what are some of the are there some additional challenges to monitoring that? Does it make it a little easier in some areas? What's that look like?
Well, the thing is, with Teams, there's less that you have to worry about monitoring, right? Because it's, like, you don't have to worry about servers and keeping them patched and making sure the services are running and all that sort of stuff. Again, unless you're still using direct routing, but for most of the infrastructure, that's now out of your hands. It's now left to Microsoft. The challenge still remains is, how do you make sure that your people are still having a good experience, especially when you're talking about voice. So previously, up until about a month ago or so, the only way you could really monitor people's call quality and things like that was via Microsoft's own native tools, which do the job, barely, but there's lots of value that third-party companies could obviously bring to the table if they were only allowed to. So Microsoft finally just opened up an API that allows third-party vendors get access to call data, so that you can start troubleshooting call quality. Because even though the infrastructure is gone, you still have to worry about your own internal network and call quality and things like that. All that sort of stuff is still under your purview. So thinking that going to Teams is going to magically solve all your call quality issues it's not going to happen, right? Because you still have your users with their endpoints and their various ways of using those endpoints.
Right.
You still have to worry about your network infrastructure and whether you have QoS functioning properly internally, and you've got your infrastructure, your network infrastructure scaled properly to be able to handle the load. That's still a challenge. So thankfully, Microsoft has opened up that API so that we can so that other customers or other vendors can access that to be able to provide more value, to be able to help troubleshoot.
Great. Yeah, awesome. There was an interesting poll question in our webinar that we had recently that kind of speaks to, the large customer that you saw that just went all in with Teams, where we asked a question of everyone who has Skype for Business today, how many will be transitioning within the next 3 to 12 months, and it looks like 83% of them within 12 months will be moving over to Teams. So that kind of lines up exactly what you're seeing out there, right?
Yep, exactly.
So, what do you think during that transition from Skype to Teams? What are some things that you think people are going to face during that transition? I know you said one company turned up pretty quickly, but what are
Yeah.
some challenges
Well,
that they'll
one
have?
thing, the challenge is, so you know what I've seen, because we deal with a lot of customers who are facing this migration right now. Um, One thing I got to stress, and I cringe whenever I hear this, is people say, "Oh yeah, we got everybody. They could use Teams or Skype. We got them set up, configured in islands mode." And if you're not familiar with how Teams works, so there's multiple modes that you can be in. So islands mode, it's basically means that you can use Skype or Teams like basically as you want to. So if you want to use Skype, go ahead. You want to use Teams, go ahead. No
Mm-hmm.
problem. And then there's other modes, like you can say use Teams for collaboration and meetings. So and then use Skype for calls and stuff like that. Or then you can say all Skype, or you can say all Teams.
Mm.
So a lot of customers at first they go in thinking, yeah, I don't really want to make a jump to Teams yet. Let's do the islands mode for everybody. And so everybody starts using both of them in varying, varying capacities. And the problem comes when you start realizing, okay, we want to start moving some people's workloads over to Teams entirely. And as soon as you do that, you make some people islands mode, some people Teams only. That becomes extremely, like, it's hard to explain until you've actually lived it, but it makes it really difficult for people to communicate with one another. Because if you're on islands mode and you were communicating with Skype with somebody who was also on islands mode, and suddenly that person is now on Teams only, those people may not get their messages, or they're going to show up in a different place. And it's going to be very confusing to people who aren't um, IT experts. So my biggest advice to any customers who are considering move to Teams is don't do islands mode. Do islands mode for a few people initially, but make the change. Like decide to go, start off with one of the other modes, like the Skype for Business for collaboration, but then Teams for meetings, and then grow from there. Don't use islands mode.
Yeah, I had that. I actually had that experience when we had a transition over to Teams. I was in islands
And you
mode.
complain to me all the time about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
when I would have people who were on Teams only, I had to switch chats, and it was who's
Yep.
on which chat. It
Yeah, you
was
had to remember who was on who's on first. You had to try to remember who's on Teams, who's on Skype still, and it becomes rapidly difficult to manage. So yeah, to anybody out there who hasn't started yet, don't do islands mode. Just don't.
Sounds
Just say
good on
no.
paper. Sounds
Yeah,
good on paper. It's
yeah,
it
just
does.
in practice, it's a pretty tough deployment model. Yeah.
Yeah,
for
Go
sure.
all in. Just
Just
jump in
do
the
it.
deep end.
just jump in. Yep.
Yeah.
It's easier than you think, to be honest. It's yeah.
Yeah. Agree.
So I know with the pandemic that we have going on, what were some people having challenges with before the pandemic took place, like getting into this?
Getting into Teams
Yeah, getting in a team, just monitoring this space. What was like pre-pandemic? What did that look like for people?
for
People were
monitoring
dipping their
Teams.
toe.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was
I
very
think
much
people were
dipping their
dipping their
toes.
toes. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then afterwards, now that they're trying to get into this, what's some of the obviously there's probably a plethora of more problems that they've run into with an instant transition from nobody on the edge to everybody on the edge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what, yeah, we've seen. And we had a lot of requests from customers saying, I want to be able to monitor that. I want to know how many sessions are coming through the edge. How are my edge servers performing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, we saw lots of customers suddenly, who the edge servers were like, yeah, they're doing their thing. And to suddenly, oh my God, that thing is front and center now. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so we had a lot of customers who were really, really concerned about how their edge servers were doing.
Yeah, I know that there's been multiple different collaboration platforms, and Zoom was one of those that just kind of got an instant giant user base overnight. And
Yeah.
I joined. We're in the collaboration business, so I'm on Skype, I'm on Teams meetings all day, I'm on Zoom meetings, I'm on WebEx meetings. I mean, we use all platforms, right? And you could tell that some platforms, especially in the late March, early April timeframe, as this instant giant user base went to collab, like around noon central every day, they would just start grinding to a halt. How do you think the Microsoft infrastructure, how's that been holding up, I guess,
We
during this?
saw, yeah, early days. Early days, there were definitely we saw challenges. We saw some slowness, but Microsoft, honestly, I think they did a pretty good job
Mm,
of scaling. I know they kind of stopped development on a lot of things and put a lot of resources into stabilization on the team's back end.
okay.
And I got to say now, like it's been fine. They've done a great job, and even at its worst, quote unquote,
Yeah.
it to most users, it really was pretty transparent. I think the only thing that was the most visible thing you would see is maybe slow presence updates.
Okay.
That was probably the most visible thing. But honestly, I don't think we ever had any issues with any meetings or anything like that. All those seem to work flawlessly throughout this. I do recall, I know I was working with some customers, they were seeing some issues with various other things, actually not even related to Teams, more relating to Exchange voicemail and stuff like that. But um, other than that, yeah, I think they've done a really good job.
An interesting
I think they
report
had a
that I
good
saw
blend.
during this
Yeah.
transition, especially in March, if you saw, I think it was a report that you might have actually shared from a customer, but there was this utilization report of the different types of modalities used. And I know that talking with a lot of friends and family that have started using the collaboration platforms, that a lot of the new people coming into the collab platforms seem to be natively using video, where a lot of us old school guys who've been working from home forever, we seem to be voice only.
Yeah.
And it really, you kind of
What was the
saw
reason for
this
that?
float around
There's a
video, and
reason
then
for
all of a
that.
sudden video just took off.
Yeah.
And that bandwidth usage, right? Is that something that you see when you're looking with customer environments?
Oh,
The heavy
absolutely.
video
We've
use, just all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like looking at some graphs of usage. Now, first of all, when we looked at it from a Skype perspective, as people we saw edge traffic. We were looking at edge traffic. You can see, oh, it's ticking along like this, and all of a sudden in March, huge jump,
Yeah,
right? And then as you compared that against once they migrated to Teams, you saw the video usage go way up all of
yeah,
a sudden. Reasons for that are, well, I think Teams makes it a little bit easier to use video. I think honestly, having the ability to do custom backgrounds kind of made it a little bit more fun. I
hmm
mean, look at me, I'm sitting in a DeLorean right now, right? So I think that has had something to do with it as well. But and then also with Microsoft moving from first three by no, I guess, yeah, 3x3 to
Grid.
the grid. Yeah,
yeah.
originally it was like whatever 5 or 6. Now you got 3x3, and eventually going to what is it, 7x7? So 49 video streams. Can't even imagine what that's going to look like. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that's definitely made a big difference. And plus, again, everybody's working from home, and I think people also are craving any kind of a connection with their coworkers, and video provides a great way to have it, for
Well, it's
better or for
also kind
worse.
of
Because
a
now I have to wear a shirt.
yeah. It's kind of a I attribute it to like the old school way, right? Like I've been again, I've been collab from home forever, and we're voice only. We're used to only being on voice. And then my wife's a teacher also. I have friends who are in the healthcare industry, and they instantly went home and were video only. And to me, video is kind of weird. It's this new. It's not new, but it's not the norm. But to them, it was weird to only be on voice when you couldn't see anybody. It's like two different worlds coming
Yeah,
together, and
yeah.
then they're all video, and we're just we're kind of we're the ones catching up when we used to be on the forefront of collaboration.
I know, like my boss would say, "No, everybody turn on video. Everybody use him." Oh, fine,
Right,
okay.
right,
Now I gotta like not pick my nose.
right. Yeah, yeah. And to them, I mean, especially friends in healthcare, that's just what they do. They just turn video on. It wasn't they didn't have to ask to do it. It's just it was weird the other way.
Yeah, yeah, it's true, totally true.
So let's talk a little bit about. Obviously, we want to get into. We are Nectar, and we do have a monitoring platform. We have Nectar Tin.
Okay, look at that.
Probably some people have probably heard of it. If you haven't heard of it, let's talk a little bit about Nectar Tin for Microsoft Teams and some benefits that you can realize using that platform to manage and monitor your team's environment.
Yeah. So Tim, do you want to talk about this? You've been pretty quiet down there.
Oh yeah, just
little hobble.
I'm happy to. Yeah, you bet. So yeah, you're right, Stephen. Obviously, Nectar 10 for Teams, specifically Nectar for Microsoft Teams, analytics is really driving kind of the main workload. So it's analytics of the call data, and I see that as taking in two primary workloads. One is what I'm going to call day-to-day or week-to-week operations type reporting. So you want to basically be able to see adoption, usage, trending, that sort of thing. And the second primary scenario is going to be around troubleshooting a call. It's the workloads that are most common for tier 1, tier 2 type folks, just wanting to see, hey, what's going on with that particular call, who was in that call, who had a bad call. And most of that is going to be around conferencing. So that's where we spent a lot of time, just making sure that we had a really strong experience for helping people understand what a conference call looked like from the context of the users on that call, and being able to really quickly identify who on that call was having a bad experience, and who was causing the bad experience, regardless of what people were hearing on the line, because it's always about the perception of the people listening, right? So that's what we've really focused on, is that conferencing workload for troubleshooting.
Right. And I mean, so there's value to monitoring the team's environment itself, but I don't think I've ever been in an environment where you're a single vendor.
Yeah, I think that's just the norm everywhere. You're exactly right. I mean, most organizations are going to have multiple vendors in their environment. They're going to have some Microsoft Teams and some, potentially some Cisco or some Avaya or Microsoft Skype for Business or some other platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the one thing we haven't even really spent much time talking about today, which is PSTN calling from Teams. And PSTN calling, is a critical workload for a lot of organizations, for most organizations. Oddly, I hardly ever make PSTN calls in my life, but I know that a lot of people do. And so I think that the whole situation around direct routing, and bring your own SIP trunk or bring your own carrier to the Microsoft Teams environment using direct routing, just by itself, that introduces a new vendor into the environment, because you're going to have an SBC from another vendor that you need to be able to monitor and be able to troubleshoot as well. So Nectar can, of course, empower that. We've got Nectar Diagnostics for Teams direct routing, and not only are we looking at the sessions and the media signaling out to the SIP trunk and the SIP carrier, but we're also looking at the health and performance of the SBC and the SIP trunks on the SBC itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of network infrastructure, right, that it relies on these things functioning properly. So, and you can even get into, especially with the collaboration platforms, the internet edge heading out to, WebEx or Teams or whatever that platform might be.
Yeah,
and with
I think
constraints out to the collaboration provider itself.
We often get asked, hey, why do I need Nectar for Teams when Microsoft offers free tools in the Teams Admin Center and CQD? And I'll just offer some thoughts on that and then maybe pass it to Ken. But, for me, it really comes down to what's the tool purpose built to do. And when you look at what you're talking about, which is the local on-prem connections and the PSTN connectivity to the SIP trunks, that's just something that Microsoft's, they're handing the call off, but they really didn't build the tool, for monitoring SBCs and paying attention to the health and performance of that. That's not what Microsoft built their tool to do.
Right.
It's an administration tool that also happens to have a few reports in it, but it's really designed to administer Teams environment, provision, turn user features on and off, etc. But when I get asked that question, I really do think it has a lot to do with what you're saying, Stephen, which is there's a lot of things to look at other than just simply a user and that user's calls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the questions I get asked when I'm talking with customers about what they're looking for is because of the multi-vendor environments. They want to not only see calls from the team's platform, but they want to see calls across all platforms, and how, usage statistics and what kind of conferences, everyone's using, and et cetera. And being able to have a central pane of glass to look across their whole environment, their whole collaboration environment, seems to be, almost at the top of the list of every trade show and situation that I walk into. That's what's asked for.
For sure. And I think this is, we get this question about how we compare to the vendor-free tools pretty often, right? So
Yeah.
that's not a new question for us in the Teams environment. We've gotten that question for years, from a variety of different vendors, and the vendor-provided tools always have that limitation. They're just single vendor, and that's just the nature of vendor provided tools. But Ken, you've got some other thoughts, I think, on some of the differences between what Microsoft provides in CQD and what we can do with Nectar.
Yeah, the thing with CQD and the Teams Admin Center, CQD gives you lots of great historical type view where you can look for trends and things like that, but it doesn't really give you a way to say, okay, I see that this particular location has a large number of poor calls that are over Wi-Fi. Who are actually having those issues? You really can't dig into those, the meat of that at all. With Nectar 10, we make that like that simple. You want to see how many people are on Wi-Fi who had bad calls in the New York location? Fine, we'll give that to you. And then we give you a lot more deeper data, and easier way to bridge from the high level trends to the low level, being able to look at individual calls. We provide a really, really nice bridge between those two things.
Individual calls and individual sessions within that call. You can go from a very high level global view and drill all the way down to an individual audio session in a conference call. And that's just, that workflow is extremely common, and I think one that we uniquely enable compared to Microsoft CQD.
And we've also got a lot of cool things coming too, so including insights and be able to tell you, looking at an individual call, be able to say, hey, by the way, we're noticing that other people at this location or this subnet or this wireless access point are also having issues. So we're going to be bringing a lot more intelligence to the game here in the next several months.
We are, however, unfortunately not going to have a flux capacitor in the product, and
we're not going to be able to go back in time.
Well, we can go back in time from a reporting perspective. We just can't go back to the future.
Right.
That's too bad. Marty, it's your kids.
Well, I think that's pretty much going to do it for most of us. Tim, do you want to, I think we've got some other webinars and activities coming up. You want to leave us with what we've got coming up here in the near future?
Sure, absolutely. So the next area of focus for us that we're going to be talking about with our webcasts and podcasts, et cetera, is going to be around Cisco. So Stephen, you're going to be the host and the guest in the next session. It's going to be around Cisco video monitoring and analytics CUCM monitoring and analytics troubleshooting with a specific focus on Cisco video, variety of platforms there. So
are we breaching some ethical things here if the host is also the guest?
Yeah, I don't know.
I spend a lot of time talking to myself, so I'm used to that.
Yeah, clearly,
yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in for today's NectarTV podcast session, and we will catch you in the next one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.